I'm Stephanie Blackwood, 29 years old, and the day my father told me to get out and never come back, I left with one suitcase and $200 to my name. I didn't have a plan, only a heart pounding so loud it made my fingers shake. By the next morning, I was boarding a flight to Los Angeles, where an air mattress on my best friend's floor was the only place left that felt safe today. I'm looking out at the Pacific from the balcony of a $30 million home in Malibu, sipping coffee while the sun lifts over the ocean. I didn't get here overnight, but everything started the moment that front door slammed behind me before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever been told you weren't enough. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, in a modest 4-bedroom house with faded siding and a small patch of yard, just big enough for a swing set. Dad was a sales manager at a manufacturing company. He wore a tie every day, but never brought joy home with him. Our dinners were quiet unless he was correcting someone. Usually me. He expected straight A's, a clean kitchen dinner served by 6, and no excuses. Even when my report card showed a 98, he'd ask where the missing 2 points had gone. Mom was soft-spoken. She'd been an art teacher once before she quit to raise us. Dad said, "A Blackwood wife didn't need to work." I watched the light dim in her eyes year after year. She'd pat my shoulder gently after his outbursts, whispering it would pass. But it never really did. My brother Jason was 2 years older. He played football, joined business clubs, and called our father sir. Even after high school, Dad never hid his pride in Jason. He used words like future executive and leadership material when he talked about him. But when I showed interest in computers, it was called a hobby, or worse, a waste of time. The summer I turned 12, my grandmother Lillian gave me a refurbished laptop. Dad called it a distraction. Grandma said I had a mind of my own, and thank goodness for it that computer changed everything I learned to code. First simple websites, then more complicated apps. I'd stay up late building things while the rest of the house slept. When I turned 16, I showed off my first real app over dinner. It helped students organize study notes and generate flashcards. Jason grunted. Mom smiled. Dad asked why my chemistry grade had dropped from an A to an A- before I could answer. The doorbell rang. It was a delivery, Jason's regional football trophy. Dad leapt up from the table, cheering, taking photos, calling relatives. My cake sat untouched until almost midnight. I made myself a quiet promise that night, lying in bed with the smell of frosting still in the air. One day, I'd build something no one could ignore, not even him. Through high school, I worked any job I could, tutoring, babysitting, designing websites for local businesses. I called it my escape fund. I didn't want to rely on the college money Dad set aside, because in our house, money always came with conditions. Grandma passed away. My senior year, she left me $10,000 and a note that read, "Build something wonderful. Stephanie, and never let anyone clip your wings." When the acceptance letter from UCLA arrived with a scholarship for computer science, I felt like I could finally breathe. Dad said, Blackwoods were business leaders, not tech support. He waved the letter like it was a parking ticket and told me I was ruining my future. I left anyway, packed what I needed, and boarded a bus to Los Angeles. The air felt different the day I arrived, like I'd finally stepped out of someone else's life and into my own. I didn't know then how many times I'd have to start over, but I also didn't know yet what I was capable of. The first few months at UCLA passed in a blur of lectures, coding labs, and late-night shifts at the campus IT help desk. I worked mornings at a student center, evenings debugging wireless issues in dorms, and weekends designing websites for anyone who'd pay. Most nights, I crawled into bed long past midnight, too wired to sleep, too tired to think. Tara and I had met during freshman orientation. She was majoring in digital marketing and talked fast, laughed easily, and made everyone feel like they'd known her forever. She came from San Francisco. Her parents owned a successful restaurant chain and called every week just to ask if she needed groceries or a break from school stress. We came from different worlds, but something about her felt safe. By sophomore year, we were living in a cramped off-campus apartment with wobbly chairs, a leaky kitchen faucet, and mismatched mugs we found at yard sales. One Thursday night, We were sitting cross-legged on the floor, picking through cartons of cold Chinese takeout, when Tara looked up from her lo mein and said, "What if we built something together?" She was scrolling through a list of campus events and restaurant promos on her laptop. Built what I asked: an app. Something that helps students like us find good food deals. Restaurants have leftovers, we're always broke. Why not connect both? We named it Food Saver before the containers were even in the trash. I handled the back end and code. Tara pitched the concept to local restaurant owners. We worked between classes during lunch breaks and late into the night. Our coffee budget tripled. So did our sense of purpose. By Thanksgiving break of our junior year, we had a working beta. 20 restaurants had agreed to participate. I booked a flight to Denver, nervous but hopeful. My plan was simple: share the app with my family and maybe, just maybe, see a flicker of approval in my father's eyes. Dinner at home felt familiar at first. The table was set with the usual mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, and the same cut glass bowl we used every year. Mom had roasted a turkey, and Jason was already halfway through a story about a new position he was aiming for at his investment firm. When the conversation settled, I opened my phone and said, "I've been working on something I want to show you." Mom leaned in, her eyes kind. Jason raised an eyebrow. My father, still slicing his turkey breast, gave a nod without looking up. "It's called Food Saver," I began. "It helps local restaurants sell excess food to college students at a discount in real time. They post deals, we send push notifications to nearby users. It reduces food waste, supports small businesses." "Coupons," my father said flatly. "No, not coupons. It's about geolocation. Inventory movement. Efficiency." Jason looked back at his plate. Mom smiled softly and said, "That sounds smart, honey." My father set down his fork. "Stephanie, thousands of apps launch every day. Most fail. We're already running a pilot," I said. 20 restaurants are using it." "Desperate ones, I imagine," he replied. "They'll take anything to stay afloat." "Frank," my mother said gently. He continued as though she hadn't spoken. "When it fails, maybe you'll take business seriously." I didn't touch my pie. I changed my flight and left the next morning. Back in California, I buried myself in work. One of my professors, Dr. Hayden, noticed my performance and invited me to join a research group. He taught advanced algorithms but had a gift for making the complex feel manageable. He wasn't warm exactly, but he believed in feedback, not criticism. "You've got a rare combination," he told me once after a lab presentation. "You see structure where others see chaos. But more importantly, you don't give up." He connected me with a small cybersecurity startup called SecureLink. The internship was unpaid, but the experience was real. I worked all day at the IT desk, coded for the startup in the evenings, and studied on weekends. It was exhausting and relentless. Meanwhile, Food Saver launched publicly and flopped. We didn't have enough users to sustain the model. Restaurants stopped posting. Downloads stalled. After 4 months, we shut it down. "I'm sorry," I told Tara as we split a bottle of wine on our apartment floor. She held up her glass. "Failing forward. Next time we do it better." Her optimism didn't erase the sting, but it helped me breathe. By senior year, I'd changed. My coursework was more focused. My coding was sharper. I added a business minor, a quiet concession to the voice I could still hear in the back of my mind. The voice that said, talent wasn't enough. When I walked across the stage at graduation, Mom was there. Jason wasn't. My father had a conference. I saw later that he'd gone golfing. Mom squeezed my hand at dinner. "He's proud of you. He just doesn't know how to say it." I nodded. I didn't say that I no longer believed that was true. The economy was already slowing. 2 of my job offers were withdrawn. The third came with a salary too small to cover rent in Los Angeles. My savings were thin. Student loan payments were about to begin. I packed up my apartment, hugged Tara goodbye, and boarded a return flight to Denver. I told myself it was temporary. It didn't feel that way when I stepped back into my childhood bedroom. The posters were gone, but the familiar weight returned almost instantly. I took a junior role at a local tech company. Not what I wanted, but enough to get by. After work, I coded, I budgeted, I saved. Dad reinstated rules, curfews, chores, dinners at 6. I bit my tongue and reminded myself it was only for a little while. Jason came by with his wife Heather most weekends. The dynamic hadn't changed. Dad praised Jason's promotion. At dinner, he'd make snide remarks about the tech bubble and how I was still answering help desk calls. One Sunday, I mentioned a project I was building, a simplified encryption system for small businesses. He looked mildly curious. "Sounds complicated," he said. "Most small business owners barely know how to print an invoice." "That's the point," I replied. "It's secure software built for non-technical users." He shook his head. "You'd be better off climbing the ladder at your real job." I let it go, but the pressure kept building. One night, after staying late to fix a bug, I came home past dinner. Dad was waiting in his chair. "Your mother kept food warm for an hour," he said. I texted. "There was an issue at work. At your real job or your imaginary company?" I stood there still holding my bag. "I've got investors interested, people who see potential. As long as you live under my roof, you follow my rules," he said, standing now. I felt something shift. I have been. But that doesn't mean I have to accept being dismissed. Jason and Heather arrived mid-argument. They froze in the hallway. "Maybe your sister could learn something from your example," Dad said to Jason. That was it. "I'm not Jason. I'm not you, and I'm done pretending I need your approval." His jaw tightened. "Then get out. And stay out." The room fell silent. Mom's hands covered her mouth. I walked upstairs, packed a single suitcase, and left the rest behind. Jason watched from the hallway. Heather whispered something I didn't hear. My father didn't look up from his chair. At the door, I turned once more. Goodbye. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I would sleep, but I knew I wasn't coming back. Tara sent me a plane ticket that same night. I stayed in a cheap motel near the Denver airport with my suitcase propped against the door and a flickering fluorescent light above the bed. I sat there staring at my laptop, trying to figure out where I was supposed to go next. My car was dead 6 blocks from my parents' house. My lease in LA had expired months ago. I had a little over $100 to my name after buying the ticket. I allowed myself 1 hour to fall apart. Then I washed my face, opened my laptop, and started sending out job applications. 15 by midnight. I also emailed Dr. Hayden just to let him know I was back in town and looking for any opportunities in security or development. I didn't know what would come of it, but I needed a lifeline. Tara met me at LAX with 2 iced coffees and a long hug. "You're staying with me. No arguments." Her studio was barely big enough for one person, but she cleared a corner for my suitcase and pulled out the air mattress she used for guests. Every night we'd take turns reinflating it. Every morning I'd fold my blanket into a neat square and set it on the shelf by the door. I told her I'd find something soon, that I didn't want to burden her. "Shut up and eat your ramen," she'd say. "This is temporary." I knew it was. But knowing didn't make it easier. Each night after she fell asleep, I'd stare at the ceiling, counting hours I couldn't afford to waste. I hadn't called home since I left. Pride kept me from reaching out. So did the truth I had nothing good to say. And that silence, that space between me and the people I used to belong to, felt heavier than I expected. A week later, I got a reply from Dr. Hayden. He said a colleague of his at a cybersecurity firm was looking for a junior developer. The position wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover a room somewhere. He said the interview was mostly a formality. I could start Monday if I wanted. I did. The company was called Securing Solutions. Small team. No fancy perks. But their client list included some Fortune 500 names. I worked on debugging protocols and assisting with new features. It wasn't flashy, but it was exactly the kind of experience I needed to build credibility. With my first paycheck, I rented a bedroom in a shared apartment on the east side. It was nothing special, just enough space for a twin mattress and a desk I found at a garage sale and sanded myself. My roommates were working-class 20-somethings doing their best to survive the city. A paralegal named Melissa, Brandon, a personal trainer, and Dina, who managed a restaurant and brought home leftover breadsticks on Fridays. We set cleaning schedules, shared groceries, took turns fixing the broken cabinet hinge in the kitchen. It wasn't much, but it worked. That first night in my tiny bedroom, I sat on the floor with a cup of instant noodles and looked around at the beige walls and narrow window. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Paid for with money I'd earned myself. No strings, no expectations. Every day after work, I came home, made dinner, and spent the evening coding. The security app I'd started building back at my parents' house was slowly becoming something more real. I called it Shield Key, a clean interface wrapped around complex encryption software. I designed it for small businesses, companies like the ones Tara and I used to pitch Food Saver to, places that couldn't afford a dedicated IT team but still needed to protect customer data. On weekends, I refined the code, researched market needs, and mapped out the user journey. Half my paycheck went to bills, a quarter went to student loans. The rest I tucked into savings, my new startup fund. 6 months after moving into that shared apartment, I almost skipped a tech meetup downtown. I was tired. My code wasn't cooperating. But Tara insisted, said I needed to leave my screen and talk to real people, also free pizza. I went. The pizza was cold, but the connections were worth it. During a casual roundtable, I shared what I was working on. A few people nodded politely. One guy lingered afterward. His name was Adrian Wright, UX designer. Clean-cut, soft-spoken, and curious. He asked questions that made me think about how non-technical users might struggle with the interface, about whether I was asking too much of them up front. He pulled out his tablet and sketched a simplified version of my layout. Cleaner menus, fewer clicks. It made more sense in 5 minutes than I'd been able to design in weeks. "You should consider this," he said. "I'd like to." We exchanged contact info. A few days later, we met again at a coffee shop, then again the following week. "I think we'd make a good team," I said. 50-50. You handle design, I handle security." He looked down at the mock-up we were revising. "I'm in." We started building a pitch deck the next night. We emailed investors, angel funds, startup incubators. We practiced our presentation in Tara's kitchen over lukewarm coffee and leftover Thai food. We tightened our financials, clarified our market, rewrote our answers after every rejection. Most emails said no. Some didn't reply at all. But one name stood out, Patricia Lawson. She'd sold 2 security firms and now invested in early-stage cybersecurity startups. She agreed to meet us. We sat across from her in a conference room that smelled faintly of leather and lavender. She listened, asked questions, took notes. Then she leaned back and said, "There's a real gap in this market. You're solving the right problem. I want in." After a few follow-ups and a legal review, she offered $150,000 in seed funding for 15% equity. Adrian and I signed the paperwork that Friday afternoon. That night, I sat on the edge of my mattress, back against the wall laptop, open bank account, glowing with 5 figures. I thought about the night I left Denver. I thought about the hallway, the silence, the porch light flickering as I shut the door behind me. Then I called my mom. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Stephanie, I'm okay," I said. "More than okay. We just got our first investment." I told her about Adrian, about Patricia, about Shield Key. She listened quietly. When I finished, she said, "I always knew you'd do something big." I didn't ask about Dad. She didn't offer anything. Before we hung up, I said, "You can tell him if you want." I wasn't sure if she would, but I didn't need her to. We were building something, and this time no one could take it from me. Shield Key wasn't flashy. It didn't promise miracles. What it did was work quietly, reliably, and without asking users to understand what encryption even meant. Adrian refined the interface until even the least tech-savvy shop owner could use it. I kept building out the back end, streamlining the code testing every layer until it passed inspection twice over. We brought in 2 part-time contractors to help us move faster, then found a shared workspace in a business incubator in Culver City. Our beta launch started with 15 small businesses, a baker, 2 chiropractors, a few tax offices, a daycare center that had suffered a minor data breach the year before. Word traveled slowly, but the feedback was steady. They liked the simplicity. They liked that someone was thinking about their scale of operation. Adrian made tutorial videos. I stayed up late answering support tickets and deploying hotfixes when something glitched. Patricia, our investor, introduced us to her network. Most weren't interested at first. The market was crowded, the numbers were small. But then we got featured in a niche newsletter focused on small business software. A few more clients trickled in. Then one of our users tweeted about Shield Key's alert system catching a phishing attempt. That post got shared over 100 times. 3 months after launch, we passed our 100th paying customer. 6 months in, we hit 300. We weren't scaling fast, but we were building trust. The day we reached 1,000 users, I stood by the office window watching traffic crawl past the intersection below. Adrian slid the latest metrics onto my desk and said, "We're going to need a bigger team." I nodded, already thinking through the next hiring round. That same week, a well-known tech blogger wrote a glowing review. He called ShieldKey surprisingly elegant and exactly what most software in this space gets wrong. The article got picked up by 2 larger outlets. Our user growth curve shifted overnight. Support requests doubled, then tripled. Adrian and I started rotating nights answering emails so we could still get sleep. By the end of the quarter, we were onboarding over 100 businesses a week. That's when the first acquisition email arrived. It was from a mid-level executive at Data Fortress, a massive cybersecurity company I'd followed since college. He said their VP of Business Development wanted to schedule a conversation. Adrian and I stared at the message for 10 minutes before replying. The meeting was set for the following week in San Francisco. We walked into the Data Fortress offices wearing clothes that still smelled faintly like startup coffee runs. The executive suite was silent, floor-to-ceiling windows gleaming behind sleek conference tables. We met with 4 people, 2 directors, 1 legal advisor, and the VP. They asked thoughtful questions about user retention, infrastructure costs, and how we handled non-standard data formats. Then the CEO, Martin Green, stepped in. He greeted us with a nod and said, "We're interested in acquiring ShieldKey. We believe it can complement our enterprise solutions and give us a better foothold in the small business sector." I stayed quiet, letting Adrian take the first response. "We're flattered," he said. "We weren't planning to sell, but we're open to hearing your thoughts." Martin offered a number 2 million. I kept my expression still. Adrian gave a polite nod and said we'd think it over. On the flight back to Los Angeles, we barely spoke. When we landed, I said, 2 million changes a lot. "It's not enough," Adrian replied. He was right. We were approaching 1 million in annual revenue. We were growing at over 20% each month. 2 million felt like someone offering a coupon for your house. Still, the fact that Data Fortress had reached out gave us leverage. Within a week, 2 other security firms emailed us. One made a verbal offer. The second one sent a preliminary term sheet. Adrian and I held firm. We wanted to build a team, a real one. We wanted to see what the company could become. So we kept building. We hired a chief revenue officer to help us expand into new verticals. We added 3 engineers, then 5. We signed a lease on a bigger office and outgrew it in 6 months. ShieldKey passed 10,000 customers the following spring. We crossed 3 million in annual recurring revenue the quarter after that. A profile ran in a major tech magazine featuring our team. They published a photo of us standing in front of a whiteboard filled with diagrams, post-it notes, and a large printout that said, "Build for them." I didn't like being photographed, but I understood what it meant. The next acquisition offer came from SecureTech, one of the biggest players in our space. Their first number was 8 million, then 12 after negotiations. Adrian and I met at the office after hours to talk it over. He sat across from me with a styrofoam cup of soup and said, "I want to keep going." Me too. We turned it down. The next 6 months were the hardest and most rewarding we'd ever had. We crossed 25,000 customers. Our team grew to 50, then 70. We opened a second office in New York. That summer I received an email with the subject line, "Acquisition Discussion, Privacy Guard." I reread it twice before forwarding it to Adrian. Privacy Guard wasn't just a competitor. They were the name in the industry. Their CEO, James Wilson, had built the company from scratch. He was a legend. The message said he wanted to meet us personally. The meeting took place at their headquarters in Silicon Valley. The office was understated, but every detail was intentional. James met us in a glass-walled conference room overlooking a courtyard. He didn't waste time. "I believe ShieldKey has built something special," he said. "We want to acquire you and make your team the foundation of our small business division." Adrian leaned forward slightly. "And what are you thinking in terms of value?" 75 million, James said. 60 in cash, 15 in stock vesting over 3 years. My ears rang. I heard the numbers, but they didn't feel real yet. He continued outlining plans for how our team would be retained, how our product would integrate, how our roadmap could scale with their resources. "We're not just buying a company," he said. "We're bringing you in as leaders." Adrian and I flew back in silence. The next day we brought it to the board. Our lawyers, our advisors. 1 week later we accepted. The day the acquisition closed, I sat alone in our empty office watching the cleaning crew remove our posters from the wall. I opened my banking app, saw the number, and closed it again. $32 million. I left the building just after sunset. My car was parked at the edge of the lot. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before calling a real estate agent. "I'm looking for a home in Malibu," I said. "My budget is around $30 million. The next part of the story didn't involve servers or product roadmaps or pitch decks. It involved 5 bedrooms, an infinity pool, and a balcony overlooking the ocean. But the part I couldn't have predicted was how quiet it would feel. Adrian and I didn't celebrate the acquisition the same way everyone else did. After the champagne toast and team photos, he slipped out early. I stayed behind to thank each of our employees. Then I walked back into my office, shut the door, and sat alone for the first time all day. The wire transfer had already gone through. I opened the banking app, saw the number, and closed it again. $32 million. I didn't feel anything at first, just quiet. The next morning, I called a real estate agent in Malibu. "I'm looking for something coastal," I said. "Private. Contemporary. My budget's $30." 2 weeks later, I signed the closing documents on a modern glass house perched above the Pacific. 5 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, an infinity pool that wrapped around the back of the house like it was reaching toward the horizon. It wasn't just a home, it was a world away from the place I'd left with a suitcase and a dead car. The first week passed slowly. I woke early, walked barefoot through rooms that echoed when I spoke. I hired a housekeeper, a part-time assistant, and someone to manage the grounds. Every decision felt strange, picking curtain lengths, choosing between shades of gray tile, deciding how to stock a wine fridge I hadn't asked for. For years, everything had been about survival and strategy. Now I had choices I didn't know how to make. At work, I settled into a new role as division lead at Privacy Guard. I managed a team of over 100 people and oversaw a budget larger than anything I'd handled before. My calendar filled with executive meetings, roadmap reviews, and cross-team strategy sessions. I performed well. I knew the product. I understood the market. But at night, after my last Zoom call ended and the house went still, I'd stand by the balcony window and feel like I was still waiting for something. Adrian noticed. One afternoon after a long session at headquarters, he offered to grab coffee before I headed back to Malibu. "You good?" he asked as we sat on a bench outside the cafe. "You've been somewhere else lately." I nodded. "It's just strange. I thought I'd feel something different." He waited. "Everything I used to want, I have," I said finally. "But it all feels quiet." He didn't rush to fix it. Just let the silence stretch out. Later that week, I reread an email I'd ignored for months. It was from my father. The subject line had just said, "Congratulations, Stephanie." The message was 3 sentences long, something about how he saw the article on our acquisition, how he was impressed, how he'd like to reconnect next time I was in Denver. I hadn't responded. I forwarded it to my therapist, Dr. Brennan. "How do I handle this?" I wrote. Her reply came the next day. "Start by asking what you want. Closure connection, a conversation. Be clear with yourself before you give him another chance to shape the terms." I waited a few more days before writing back to my father. "I'll be in Denver next month for a conference. I can meet for dinner if that works." He replied the same day, said he'd make a reservation. I booked a room at a hotel downtown rather than staying with family. I told myself it was a boundary, not a punishment. When I arrived, the city felt familiar but distant, like a childhood bedroom with someone else's furniture inside. We met at a restaurant near Union Station, neutral ground. Mom was already seated when I arrived, smiling nervously. Jason and Heather were there too. It felt like a holiday meal we'd never planned. "You look well," Dad said, eyeing my suit jacket and the watch on my wrist. "Thanks," I said, sliding into the chair across from him. Dinner started with small talk. Jason shared stories about their baby. Mom asked about the weather in Malibu. Heather complimented the restaurant's decor. No one mentioned why we were really there. Until dessert. The article said 75 million, Dad said, settling into the posture I remembered from every high school lecture. That's an impressive achievement. I always knew you had it in you. Must be from me. Mom shifted in her seat. Jason looked down. Heather froze mid-bite. I placed my fork down gently. I don't think that's how it happened. Dad raised an eyebrow. I succeeded after being told again and again that I wouldn't. I continued. I succeeded with no safety net. Because mine was cut. There was a pause. I let it sit. I pushed you to be tough, he said, still calm. Looks like it worked. No, I said. You pushed me away. That's not the same. I folded my napkin and looked toward my mother. Thank you for dinner. I'll call you tomorrow. Outside, the air was cool against my face. I walked slowly, letting each step clear the heat from my chest. My phone buzzed with a message from Jason. That took guts. Call me tomorrow. I didn't reply right away. I stood at the corner near the hotel, watching the lights change across the street. Then I started walking again. Back in Malibu, something shifted. I went days without opening my laptop after work. I rearranged furniture, painted one of the guest rooms, cooked real meals. I had my first panic attack on the living room floor 3 nights after that dinner. Dr. Brennan helped me untangle it slowly. You've earned everything, she said. But emotional currency is different. Your father's approval was the currency you chased. Now that you have financial freedom, you're confronting what never got settled. I started adding pieces of myself to the house books. I hadn't unpacked a canvas from one of Grandma Lillian's old art boxes, a ceramic bowl I'd made in college. I converted one bedroom into a home office and hung a corkboard filled with sketches for new ideas. The space softened little by little. I also started drafting a new project plan. This time it wasn't about security software. It was about education. The idea for EdSecure came together over a weekend in late spring. I'd spent Saturday morning clearing out boxes in the garage, most of them still taped shut from the move. Buried between an old external hard drive and a stack of college notebooks, I found the flash drive that held the original FoodSaver prototype. The interface was clunky. The code was basic, but looking at it reminded me what it felt like to build with no audience, no investors, no pressure. I opened a blank document and typed a single sentence. Cybersecurity should be accessible to everyone. That night, I mapped out the first module's basic encryption password hygiene phishing prevention. Not for businesses this time, but for schools, libraries, community centers, anywhere people learned on outdated machines with weak firewalls. The next morning, I called Adrian. I think I'm starting something new, I said. He didn't sound surprised. Send me what you've got. He didn't want a steak, just gave feedback, helped mock up the first draft of the user experience. I hired a small team, educators curriculum, writers, junior developers. We named the platform EdSecure. We priced it on a sliding scale and tailored it to public institutions with limited IT budgets. The launch was quiet. A few dozen school districts, a handful of charter networks, but it caught on quickly. Word spread through education forums. Some early users sent thank you emails saying it was the first time they felt confident explaining digital security to their students. One district used EdSecure to train all its middle school teachers. Another wrote it into their IT policy for new hires. We passed 5,000 partner institutions in under 2 years. I kept my role at Privacy Guard, but stepped back from daily product oversight. I spent more time with the EdSecure team, smaller group, fewer suits, more mission. Some nights I sat in the home office and just listened to their calls echoing down the hallway. They talked about training gaps in rural districts, how to explain ransomware to a 6th grader, which languages to translate our modules into next. It was different from ShieldKey, not less intense but more grounded. I felt like I was building something with long roots. That summer, I spoke at a technology education conference in San Francisco. The session was mid-afternoon after the keynote. I kept it practical, no buzzwords, just case studies and classroom photos. Afterward, a man approached me near the registration table. He looked familiar in the way people sometimes do when they belong in the same circles but haven't been introduced. I liked your talk, he said. I run a nonprofit doing STEM education in low-income districts. We've used your open access modules for 2 years now. His name was Michael Chen. He wore a navy sweater over a dress shirt and carried a notebook covered in sticky tabs. We talked for 20 minutes by the water fountain before I had to catch my car. He emailed me the next day to thank me again. A week later, he asked if I'd be willing to consult on one of their new curriculum pilots. I said yes. That was how it started. We met for coffee to review outlines. Then for dinner after a site visit in Long Beach. Then a long walk on a Saturday morning after touring a school in the Central Valley. Michael was steady in a way that didn't ask for anything. He never made me feel like I needed to prove anything to him. His organization wasn't flashy, but it was effective. Grant's fieldwork teacher trainings. He'd been at it for years. The first time I invited him to Malibu, he brought a bag of groceries and cooked breakfast from scratch pancakes, berries, eggs with scallions, and insisted we eat outside, even though the wind kept pulling at the napkins. "This house doesn't intimidate me," he said, sipping coffee with both hands. "I know how hard you work to build what's in it." He moved in 2 years later. He brought his books, mostly science fiction and nonfiction history, and his habit of making big breakfasts every Sunday. The house felt different with him in it. Not quieter, just fuller. My mother came to visit that fall. She hadn't seen the house before. She wandered through each room slowly, her fingertips brushing across window frames. Polished counters, old photographs I'd finally put in frames. In the art studio I'd converted from one of the guest bedrooms, she found a set of unopened brushes and acrylics I'd bought on a whim and never used. "These are nice," she said, lifting one gently. "I used to have brushes like this." "You still do," I told her. She stayed for a week. In that time she painted 3 small landscapes and left one drying on the easel before her flight home. I hung it near the stairwell where I'd pass it each morning. Jason visited later that year. He brought his wife Heather and their son Thomas. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a habit of grabbing at shoelaces and cables. We ate lunch on the patio while he napped in a shaded stroller. Jason watched the ocean quietly for a while, then said Dad's mellowed a little. I raised an eyebrow. "Not a lot," he added. "Just a little." "I don't expect much," I said. He nodded. "Me neither." I think that's helped. He talked about leaving his firm. He'd started a small construction company focused on sustainable design. He wanted to work on projects that felt like they mattered. Said watching me walk away from the family script had shifted something in him. We still didn't talk much about childhood, but our conversations had changed. We didn't keep score anymore. That Christmas I hosted. Michael cooked, Jason brought wine, Mom made pie, Heather brought baby pictures. Even my father came. He didn't say much, just observed the house. Asked a few questions about the view, the materials, the layout. On the last night, after everyone else had gone to bed, he and I stood out on the balcony. "This place is something," he said, folding his hands behind his back. "You've done well," I nodded. "I still think you could have gotten here quicker if you'd gone to business school." I smiled faintly. Maybe I said. But I got here. We stood in silence as the waves moved below us, folding in and out like breath. 6 months after that Christmas in Malibu, I launched the Blackwood Foundation. The idea had taken shape slowly pulled from every conversation I'd had with young women trying to break into tech. The ones juggling school jobs and doubts. The ones who'd been told like I had that ambition was arrogance, that tech was a man's field, that dreams were impractical unless they came with a fallback plan. The foundation offered microgrants mentorship and early-stage funding for women building tech solutions with real-world impact. No endless forms, no requirement to pitch in front of strangers, just support quietly given when it was needed most. Our first grant went to a woman named Lily Ramirez. She was 24 from East LA and had built a mobile app for coordinating care between low-income families and local healthcare providers. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. After we funded her prototype, she scaled quickly. A year later, she sold the platform to a major medical technology firm. At the celebration dinner, she raised her glass and said, "To Stephanie, who believed in me when no one else did." Her words stuck with me, not because they were about me, but because I understood what it felt like to be waiting quietly, fiercely, for someone to say you mattered. That summer, I visited Grandma Lillian's grave for the first time in years. The cemetery hadn't changed. I brought yellow roses and sat cross-legged beside the headstone. The air was dry and still. I told her everything about Shield Key, about EdSecure, about the house overlooking the ocean. I told her Michael was kind and that Mom was painting again. I told her that I'd done what she asked in that note she left me. I'd built something. Before I left, I whispered, "You saw me before I knew what I was." The next day, I flew back to Los Angeles and walked straight into a full staff meeting at EdSecure. Our newest contract had come through an education consortium representing 6 Western states. We would be providing digital safety training to nearly 1 million students and staff by the following year. Michael cooked that night, spiced chickpeas, jasmine rice, charred vegetables, and insisted we eat outside, even though the marine layer rolled in early. The wind lifted the edges of our napkins and scattered basil leaves across the table. "Feels like fall already," he said, pouring tea into mugs. "I can't remember the last time I slowed down in September." He smiled. "You earned a quieter season." I nodded, watching the light shift across the edge of the pool. Jason called the next morning. Heather was pregnant again, and they wanted to come visit one more time before the baby arrived. They brought Thomas, who had grown tall and curious, and who now asked detailed questions about how the lights in the pool changed color. That afternoon, Jason and I sat on the patio while the kids played in the grass. "You think Dad will ever come around?" he asked. "I think he's trying," I said. Jason took a long sip of water. "He still doesn't know how to say it. He might never know." Jason nodded. "But you did it. Everything he said you couldn't." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next day, a letter arrived by mail, my name written in his handwriting. The envelope was thick, folded twice. Inside was a newspaper clipping, an article from a national education journal naming EdSecure one of the top 10 most impactful tools of the year. Underneath it, a short note. "Thought you'd want to keep this. Dad." That was it. No apology, no warm line of pride. Just the article carefully clipped and folded. I set it on the desk in my office and left it there for 2 days before moving it to the drawer where I kept early contracts and first mock-ups of Shield Key. It wasn't much, but it was something. Later that week, I received an email from a former classmate at UCLA. She was now a VP at a major university foundation and wanted to nominate me for an alumni honor. "Your story," she wrote, "has been shared in classrooms. You've become a quiet kind of example." I hadn't thought of myself that way. But I filled out the form she sent, wrote a short paragraph, and attached a recent headshot. Michael found me later that night folding laundry in the guest room. "Are you going to do the podcast thing?" he asked. "I think so," I said. "They want to record something about resilience, women in STEM, that kind of angle." He leaned against the doorframe. "You going to tell the whole story? I haven't decided." He nodded. "Whatever you choose, it's yours to tell." I watched him leave the room. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. 2 weeks after that email from UCLA, I sat in the back of a lecture hall watching a group of freshmen shuffle in with laptops and coffee cups. The professor introduced me, and I walked to the front without notes. I didn't talk about the valuation numbers or the mansion or the foundation. I talked about starting from a twin mattress on a shared floor, about building code at midnight, while reheating rice, about how success often starts with someone else's disbelief. When it ended, a girl in the 3rd row raised her hand and asked, "How did you know you were going to be okay?" I paused before answering. "I didn't," I said. "I just kept moving, one decision at a time." Later that month, Mom came back to visit. We spent most of the time in the garden trimming lavender and potting herbs. She painted in the mornings and watched the ocean in the afternoons. One evening she turned to me at dinner and said, "I'm proud of you not just for what you've built, but for how you carry it." It stayed with me. Jason called after the baby was born. A girl this time, Emma Grace. They mailed me a photo of her swaddled in a green blanket, her eyes just beginning to open. When I met her a few weeks later, I held her on the same porch where I once stood alone in silence, wondering if I'd ever stop waiting for something to feel like home. And my father, he never changed in the way I once hoped, but he softened in small ways. A forwarded article, a message on holidays, a family photo on his desk that I'm told includes me now. Not a full repair, but maybe a quiet acknowledgement. Michael and I have found a rhythm. He still insists on Sunday breakfasts, even if it's just toast and coffee. We walk the cliffs behind the house in the early mornings, and sometimes he tells me I'm humming without realizing it. The house doesn't echo the way it used to. Looking back, I don't think being kicked out was the worst thing that ever happened to me. It hurt, yes, but it also gave me the clarity I'd spent years trying to earn with obedience and effort. That night on the front steps, I let go of needing to be understood by someone who couldn't see me, and in doing that, I learned how to see myself. Now when I stand at the window overlooking the ocean, I don't see a victory. I see proof that healing is slow but possible, that you can grow something beautiful from the hard ground you were handed. And that peace, real peace, comes not from proving them wrong, but from no longer needing to. If you're listening to this and holding the weight of someone's disbelief, I hope you know it doesn't define you. What you build in the quiet on your own terms can still become something remarkable. And if this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs it. Maybe it'll help them take that first small step toward something stronger. Thank you for being here.